Hey guys, welcome back to an episode of Sister Sister, a podcast for spiritual baddies. This episode today is going to be a little bit different. If you saw our social media post last week regarding the election results, we felt that it was appropriate instead of releasing our planned episode to talk about the election, provide some helpful tips and resources for those that may need them, especially if you are of a marginalized community. Um, and last and most importantly, our main goal here is to educate and inform. And despite our personal beliefs about the election, which we will not be sharing out of respect for both sides, what we will be talking about our personal experiences at the end of all this. But needless to say, our main goal here is to inform, educate, and kind of just give a better understanding of the issues and policies that both candidates have ran with.
And in hindsight, maybe we should have addressed this sooner, but this is where we are at. And especially with the discourse that is happening on social media, especially with TikTok, with Google searches and things like that are happening post election, we kind of just want to go through and talk about basically both sides of all of the major issues, how the campaigns were run, and then get into some topics about media literacy. But we do have a little bit of, our own experiences to add at the end. And we will have all of our sources cited as we always do. And we also will be having a description box on both the audio version of this and the video where we put lists of resources for things like the LGBTQ community, domestic violence victims, all of those things, general mental health resources, so that you guys can get to them very easily and it's all in a one-stop shop. Feel free to share them with everyone on social media. We probably will be making a post on our socials with different resources for different groups in the near future, along with this episode.
It's important that you still form your own opinions about things. We have certain beliefs, as we mentioned. We will not be sharing them on today's video. Needless to say, we aim for this to be a learning experience no matter what. And we hope you guys enjoy this episode. It will be a longer episode, but we do really hope you guys enjoy this. We did a lot of research to prepare for this, and we felt that even though we are a week late in posting this and recording, I think that the election, even though the changes are not going to be implemented till next January, I do think that it's important to talk about things and don't let people, no matter what side they're on, make you feel a certain way about your views. And honestly, again, research is imperative to this.
And it also is important, just one more thing before we get started with the campaign ideologies and proposed policies. You know, regardless of how an election goes, you should be well informed beforehand before you are making your decision to vote, but also afterwards, because legislation takes a while to get passed, right? Like, it's not like Donald Trump is going to go into office and everything is going to change the minute he's inaugurated again. So it takes a while, things have to get passed through, but it's important, especially if you are part of a marginalized group, to have plans and be ready for things. So you kind of need to know what exactly could be coming your way and what policies people were running on. So we're going to start with Kamala Harris's campaign and her ideologies and proposed policies, and then we'll go into Donald Trump's. And we're going to kind of keep that format where we do Harris first and then Trump after, to kind of give you the both sides of it for one, and also so you have the information at the end of a section of what is coming with Donald Trump being elected. So do you want to start with the building up the middle class portion, Amaya?
Yeah, so One of the big tenets of Kamala Harris's campaign was to build up the middle class, especially as the economy in general was one of the big issues that surrounded this election. So some of the issues that Kamala mentioned in her campaign was cutting taxes for middle class families, making rent more affordable and home ownership more attainable, growing small businesses and investing in entrepreneurs, taking on bad actors and bringing down costs, which we will explain in detail, strengthen and bringing down the cost of healthcare, protect and strengthen Social Security and Medicare, support American innovation and workers, provide a pathway to the middle class through quality, affordable education, invest in affordable childcare and long-term care, and lower energy costs as well as tackle the climate crisis.
So then the next point that she had in her campaign was safeguard fundamental freedoms, restore and protect reproductive freedoms, as well as protect civil rights and freedoms.
Then she talked about ensuring safety and justice for all, making communities safer from gun violence and crime, securing the borders and fixing the broken immigration system, tackling the opioid and fentanyl crisis, and ensuring no one is above the law.
And then the last kind of point that we have is keep America safe, secure, and prosperous. Stand with our allies, stand up to dictators, and lead on the world stage. Invest in America's sources of strength and support service members, veterans, their families, caregivers, and survivors. And both of these can be found on the Democrat and GOP websites for the candidates and their campaigns. It's very easily accessible information, but we will have it linked as we said.
So next is Donald Trump's campaign. I'll say the first 10 just to make it quick. First, he wanted to seal the border and stop the migrant invasion. He wants to carry out the largest deportation operation in American history. He wants to end inflation and make America affordable again. He also wants to make America the dominant energy producer in the world. He wants to stop outsourcing and turn the United States into a manufacturing superpower. He wants to bring large tax cut for workers and no tax on tips. He wants to defend our Constitution, Bill of Rights, and fundamental freedoms, including freedom of speech, religion, and the right to keep and bear arms, prevent World War III, restore peace in Europe and the Middle East, and build a great iron dome, the missile defense shield over the country, all made in America, end the weaponization of government against American people, and stop the migrant crime epidemic by demolishing the foreign drug cartels, crush gang violence, and lock up violent offenders. And this is all verbatim from his website, by the way.
Yeah, same with the information on Kamala Harris. Then the next 10, because there's so many. 11, rebuild our cities, including Washington, D.C., making them safe, clean, and beautiful again. 12, strengthen and modernize our military, making it without question the strongest and most powerful in the world. 13, keep the US dollar as the world's reserve currency. Fight for and protect Social Security and Medicare with no cuts, including no changes to the retirement age. Then we move on to cancel the electric vehicle mandate and cut costly and burdensome regulations. He wanted to cut federal funding for any school pushing critical race theory, radical gender ideology, and other inappropriate racial, sexual, or political content on our children. He wants to keep men out of women's sports. He wanted to deport pro-Hamas radicals and make our college campuses safe and patriotic again. He wanted to secure our elections, including same-day voting, voter identification, paper ballots, and proof of citizenship. And he wanted to unite our country by bringing it to new and record levels of success. If you want to read more on what all of that meant, both of them have more detailed things on their websites as well that you can look at, but we are going to move on into discussing specific issues that were very important to voters. If you look at any website, you can see any news source really what were the most important issues for voters. And we also are bringing in a couple that weren't like listed on every site, but were still very big topics of discussion, both in the presidential debate and interviews that both Kamala and Donald Trump did. So, one of the big things that we used for source information on this was a Washington Post article. This is not the only source we used, but we just wanted to give the preface about what that project was about, because whenever we say question and answer, that is coming from this source. So they collected the positions of the 2024 presidential candidates on abortion, climate, crime and guns, the economy, education, elections, foreign policy, and immigration. We used a variety of sources for our reporting, including publicly available information, campaign websites, voting records, news articles, and the campaigns themselves. So there is also direct quotation from interviews and the debate with this reporting. And we will link the actual like full thing where you can go and look at each individual issue and see the differences. They also included the Green Party candidate in this, but that's not really relevant to this video, so we're not including that in here.
To talk a little bit more about the issues that we mentioned, I think we did like top five. So the first one is going to be mostly about the economy, which I'm sure you've heard on both sides a lot about the economy, regardless of who you voted for, who your friends, family voted for. I think that the economy was a big issue in this election, primarily because of everything that happened in COVID. Prices increasing drastically to keep up with supply and demand, and so on and so forth. And we're going to break that down.
And also, I just want to note that economy is a big discussion on the entire world stage at this point. It's not just an America problem because the pandemic had such a change in global imports and exports during that time, manufacturing, all of those things. So it is very much so an issue throughout the entire world. But in America for this election, it was probably the number one issue that voters were speaking about and looking at candidates for. How informed they were is a completely other discussion, but we're going to go through and talk about the policies, starting with Harris. So this is the Q&As from the Washington Post. The first question was, do you support raising the retirement age? What should the retirement age be? What, if anything, needs to be done to control the cost of entitlements such as Social Security and Medicare? And the answer that was collected from data was Harris wants to strengthen Social Security and Medicare according to her campaign, but has yet to release detailed policy proposals. She has taken the Biden administration's stance on Social Security, supporting a measure to reinstate the payroll tax on earned income above $400,000. She has also said she would, as president, allow Medicare to accelerate negotiations on prescription drug prices, which are part of the administration's existing efforts to lower drug costs. In 2019, she co-sponsored a bill to expand Social Security by extending the payroll tax. She proposed a Medicare for All plan during her 2020 presidential bid, but she is not pursuing such a policy now.
One of the next questions she was asked was, what should the top federal personal income tax rate be, and at what level should it hit? What should the top corporate tax rate be? So Harris wants to raise taxes on corporations and the highest earners following Biden's budget, but she broke with Biden on raising the capital gains tax rate, saying that she supports a rate of 28% compared with 44.6% for Biden. For those earning more than 1 million, the current rate is 23.6%. She also proposed expanding tax deductions for small businesses and backs the increasing the corporate tax rate to 28% from 21%, and has promised not to raise taxes on people making less than $400,000 per year. She also wants to restore and expand the earned income tax credit and child tax credit, including a $6,000 child tax credit for the first year of a newborn's life.
Also, I just wanted to note here for anyone who doesn't know what capital gains tax is, because I feel like that's the only one in here that's not really self-explanatory. Even if it was any large sums of money that you would be making off of said things. I'm very well versed in that because I had to learn a lot about it when my mom was going through the process of settling my grand's estate because we were trying to sell her house. But that is just what that is. Okay, so the next question that was being asked is, should anything be done by the federal government to defray the cost of student loans? Harris backs the Biden administration's student loan forgiveness plan for tens of millions of borrowers. She previously pledged that she and Biden would do much more to build on their debt forgiveness policies. She has not elaborated on what her policies would be if elected. And just so you know, all of these were updated right before the election. So they had started this back in 2023 with Biden originally, and then switched it to Harris whenever she became the nominee.
The next question is, do you support cutting the defense budget from its current levels? And the answer is, the Biden-Harris administration has proposed an $849.8 billion defense budget for the fiscal year 2025, which represents a 4.1% increase from the 2023 fiscal levels that were enacted, according to the Brookings Institute.
And the budget of the US increases every year. Just keep that in mind for pretty much everything. There are some places that they cut certain things and then add things to other places, but overall, the budget for everything usually increases. The next question is, do you want continued public investment in American infrastructure, such as was covered under the bipartisan infrastructure law of 2021, which was one of the biggest pieces of legislation passed that both parties could pretty much agree on under the Biden administration? So the answer is, Harris touted the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act as vice president and has spoken about her support for investment in infrastructure, from bridges to high-speed internet that would be publicly available, things like that. Whenever we're talking about infrastructure, it is an economic issue, but it also is how do we make places in America more accessible for everyone, pretty much.
The next question is, what is your tariff policy? And the answer was, the Biden-Harris administration has imposed steep tariffs on some Chinese imports like electric vehicles and key minerals, while continuing the Trump's administration's broader tariff policy on Chinese goods. Harris has criticized additional tariffs promised by Donald Trump during the 2024 campaign as a sales tax on U.S. consumers, but it's not clear what her own trade policy is.
Then a little bit on working class specifically for the economic plans as far as unions go. Harris wanted to strengthen unions and has vowed to get the PRO Act, PRO Act passed. The legislation aimed at making it easier for workers to organize has been stalled in Congress for years. She called on the federal government to be a model employer by giving federal employee unions a bigger seat at the table and directing agencies to make sure their employees know they have the right to join a union. And then under the Biden-Harris administration, the National Labor Relations Board, the federal agency that hears labor disputes, has taken an aggressive approach to protecting workers' rights to organize and collectively bargain. Critics charge that the agency's interpretation of those rights is overly broad. Several companies, including SpaceX and Amazon, have filed lawsuits challenging the constitutionality of the NLRB's very existence when it comes to unions.
Another thing regarding the economy that was talked about is minimum wage. So the federal minimum wage has been set at $7.25 an hour since 2009. Harris called it poverty wages and noted that it amounts to $15,000 a year for full-time workers. She told NBC News that she wanted to increase it to at least $15 an hour, acknowledging that she'd need support in Congress for the change.
And minimum wage is still $7.25 an hour in Pennsylvania, where I live.
I believe in New Jersey, if I'm not mistaken, it's at least 15. Depending on where you work, it is higher. And obviously when you work, especially in like fast food and retail and whatnot, your wages increase based like I guess A on how many years you've been working there and B like you get semi-annual to annual increases. So when I worked at Starbucks, like a corporate location, I was there for almost 2 years. And in that time, my wage went from like 15 to like when I left, I want to say like 1650, somewhere around there. So it increased pretty often. But
Yeah. I was gonna say when I was in New Jersey, I know they passed the legislation for it to go up to 15 and they were like slowly increasing it. So the last time I worked in New Jersey for minimum wage, I was making $12 an hour. And I believe that was 2022, I think. So now we're going to move on to Trump's stances on literally the same exact things. So we're not going to repeat the full questions. We'll just start with the first part of it. And then if you want to know the full question, just go to the link. So the first question was, do you support raising the retirement age and about Social Security and Medicare? And the answer for Trump's side was Trump has promised to protect Social Security and Medicare, which are the biggest drivers of the national debt. Under no circumstances should Republicans vote to cut a single penny from Medicare or Social Security, Trump said in a January 2023 video message distributed by his campaign. The national debt increased by 7.8 trillion during Trump's presidency, the third biggest increase relative to the US economy's size, ProPublica reported.
the next question, what should the top federal personal income tax rate be and what should the income level when it should hit? So the 2017 Trump tax law lowered the top personal tax rate from 39.6% to 37% and the top corporate tax rate from 35% to 21%. Trump has proposed slashing the corporate tax rate for companies that make their products inside of the United States.
The next one was, should anything be done about student loans, basically? And the answer is Trump has opposed widespread student loan debt cancellation, but backed measures to consolidate income driven repayment plans, which is basically if you qualify for it, you pay based on how much you make a year. And after 10 years, your debt is forgiven as long as it is all federal debt and not private debt. That's how it's set up right now, at least. That could change.
Well, I pretty much paid my loans almost, so I don't have this opportunity. But if I waited, and I'm very grateful, I will say this as a disclaimer, my parents and I were fortunate enough to be able to split it, so I'm very happy about that. Anyway, do you support the cutting the defense budget from its current levels? So as president in 2018, Trump signed the largest Pentagon budget ever at 700 billion, a 15.5% increase from the previous year. There's no public evidence that he would support a decrease in military spending, even as he has called for deep cuts to domestic outlays because the government is spending money like drunken sailors, in his words verbatim.
Yes, that is a direct quote. Then the next question was, do you support public investment in infrastructure and, the infrastructure law of 2021? Trump campaigned on major infrastructure spending multiple times during 2016. However, negotiations with congressional Democrats broke down while he was in office, and he was never able to sign a bill that matches the scale of the bipartisan infrastructure law passed under President Biden. There literally is like no information aside from what he tried to do in 2016 about this because it's not something that was really spoken about during this campaign.
So the last question, what is your tariff policy? Trump has vowed to impose a 10% tariff on all goods imported into the United States and the 60% on goods coming from China. He pledged in September to lower the corporate tax rate to 15% for companies who make their goods inside the US as part of his aggressive America First pitch to bring back manufacturing back to the United States and stop companies from moving their business overseas.
Now, Trump on unions. By contrast, compared to Kamala's position, Trump gutted federal employee unions and expressed support for right to work laws, which weaken unions by allowing workers to opt out of paying union dues. He sacked the Labor Department and the National Labor Relations Board with corporate friendly appointees, Project 2025, which he now claims he has nothing to do with. More steps details more steps he could take to render unions powerless. An interview with SpaceX and Tesla founder Elon Musk in August, Trump joked that he liked Musk's approach to workers, and this is a direct quote. They go on strike, and you say, "That's okay, you're all gone. You're all gone. Every one of you is gone," Trump said.
Last but not least, on minimum wage, during a presidential debate 4 years ago, Trump said he'd consider a 15 an hour federal minimum wage if it does not hurt small businesses. Last month, during a photo op at McDonald's, the former president dodged the question about whether he'd be supporting raising the minimum wage and instead praising the workers and the franchises that employ them. So, just to let you guys know, if the national federal minimum wage was increased to $15 an hour versus 7.25, which is what it is currently, that would be $31,200 a year. And I want you to keep this in mind, especially because the cost of living is different in each state. So keep that in mind as we go through this. And keep this in mind in general. Every state is different. So obviously, what they're proposing would be on a national level. But again, it, I wouldn't want to say it's mandatory, but definitely states would have to, I guess, meet this minimum requirement and they can change it as they see fit. Like I said, New Jersey, the minimum wage is much higher than the federal minimum wage because of the cost of living. So,
Yeah, so I think the idea at this point with increasing minimum wage is the fact that 725 is not a livable wage, even where cost of living is much lower. You are having to work multiple jobs in order to afford housing, even in lower cost areas. I believe I looked just recently about what the average cost of a two-bedroom apartment is in the area that I live, and it was like $1,200 a month. No utilities, nothing included. Yeah. I mean, that's a lot better than like say New Jersey, but also if you're only making 725 an hour on two incomes, that's still not very much money if you have a child, if you're trying to put yourself through school to get a better job, all of those other things, groceries, gas to get to work, all so many things, car payments, whatever it may be. So just like kind of take that into account. I'm even in a place where it is a lot cheaper to live, and still a two-bedroom apartment is not really feasible even just on a 725 an hour job, and if it's just like you're a single mom with a kid, what are you supposed to do? You're going to have to work multiple jobs.
right. And the same goes in New Jersey. Obviously, it's much higher. The average rate I've seen for a two-bedroom, including where I live, we live in a two-bedroom, my mom and I. For us, it's 2,200. I've seen it as high as 300, and that's depending on the utilities available and amenities such like laundry, parking, XYZ. So it's very different. I will say that as of right now, I will be living at home for as long as I can. And, and I'm sure Elle can say the same, just because it is really not feasible to be living on our own. And obviously, Elle has experience living with roommates, especially in college. But yeah, it's not cool. We'll leave it at that.
I'm moving above the shop, but that's a whole other TED talk. Next, we're going to get into education policies from this election. So, just a note, in the fiscal year 2024, the Department of Education was allocated 238 billion, less than 2% of the total federal budget. Keep that in mind, please. So, what does the Department of Ed do, Amaya?
I did my research on this because I am very passionate about education, but either way. So, what does the Department of Ed do? So, they have the largest responsibility in doling out federal education funds. Education is ultimately the responsibility and of state and local governments under the current setup, but federal money supplements state resources and funds a variety of programs, many aimed at narrowing funding gaps for low-income or at-risk students. These hallmark programs include Title I, which provides supplemental funding to high-poverty K-12 schools used to hire teachers and otherwise support low-income communities, and the Office of Special Education Programs, which provides resources for disabled students through the age of 21. And last but not least, the department is also responsible for collecting statistics on enrollment, crime in school, staffing, and other topics, making recommendations for education reform, running the nation's report card achievement test, investigating civil rights violations, and overseeing the federal student loan program, including the distribution of Pell Grants.
Which, if you aren't familiar with what a Pell Grant is, it is income based whenever you go to college, and you are eligible for different amounts of money depending on the income that your family makes. I received a Pell Grant whenever I went to college every semester. So it is a big help for students who come from lower income families to be able to have a more affordable education if they aren't able to get big scholarships from wherever they're going. And, it gives you a little bit less debt to have to worry about. Do you want to talk about state rankings, or do we just?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
So before we also go into like the different stances, I did do research on the ranking of the education across the US. And one thing to note is that each state varies by best state overall, and then its actual education. So you might be surprised to hear this, but Florida is ranked number 1 in education, and number 50 is New Mexico. New Jersey is ranked number 4, excuse me, in education. And I want to say Pennsylvania is number 39. Just to keep that in mind. Elle's face says a lot. Like, she's like, damn, I knew that was coming.
Yeah.
But the reason why I wanted to bring this up mainly because of the fact that, again, it is up to the states and local boards in each district to kind of come up with a curriculum for their students, especially in public education. Private education is a whole different topic in TED Talk, so we're not going to talk about that. For the sake of this, we're talking about public education. For example, New Jersey, even though there are certain benchmarks that we take as like a state, each curriculum designed by each district is completely different. And the same goes for like even special programs that, for gifted and talented students and like AP honors, XYZ, like those kinds of things. So no two cities, I think, anywhere in this country are going to have the same exact curriculum. So I want you guys to keep that in mind when you think about the different stances.
Yeah, and in Pennsylvania, I don't know if it's still a thing, but it was a thing whenever I was in high school, is we had 3 tests that we had to take and pass to graduate. They were called the Keystone tests, Keystone State. And one was Algebra 1, one was biology, and then it was a like English and literature one. And if you didn't pass those 3 tests through the state's like thing, you had to go into a remediation class the next year for the class you already took while you continued on in your coursework further. So, like, for example, I took Algebra 1 in 7th grade because I was advanced. So I had to take that test. Had I failed that test, I would have continued on to the next math class, but also had an additional math class for remedial Algebra 1 to teach me how to pass the test, basically, so I could graduate. So, yeah, that's like absolutely crazy. And also in Pennsylvania, we have what's considered PSSA testing. And it's basically a Pennsylvania state test that's given out different subjects, different years, and it helps allocate funding for different school districts based on which students are struggling more in different areas of the state. very different, very interesting way of doing things. Thanks, Pennsylvania.
In New Jersey, at least where I went to many different schools because I moved quite a bit. Obviously, when we were younger, like elementary level, we had NJ Ask, so that was the benchmark that we took in like the end of the school year, like maybe April or so. And it was like a general benchmark test just to see where you are. I don't know what any of this meant for schools and funding and all that, but I'm sure there was a correlation there. I'm just gonna say that it is. If it isn't, if I'm wrong, I'll correct myself later on. We also had park. Um, that was in high school. I hated the park so much. But at least with park, I was able to get out of it one year just because I was like, why do I have to keep taking this? I don't understand. Never understand the need for standardized testing, especially given the fact that everyone is at a different level. And while I was great at reading and comprehension and stuff and sucked at math, like didn't make a difference because I was still gonna be like in the regular math class that I was supposed to be in. I'll just say that the one thing I do know about New Jersey education is that they have, I don't know if they still have it, I would have to ask some of the teachers in my family, but they had something called No Child Left Behind. And I definitely think that it's going to be worth bringing up, especially during Donald Trump's stance, just because, in a way, it was both helpful but also not. So, just something to keep in mind. Again, obviously, Ella and I had very different educations. Some things that she was learning earlier on, I wasn't learning till much later, and vice versa. So, either way, some
Yeah.
stuff to think about.
Yeah, and in PA too, we did it was called G-grade testing, but it literally it's just the grade. It's literally spelled grade, but it was called the G-grade testing initiative, and it was to get grant money. So we had to take these tests. I think it was twice a year for like several years while I was in school. I don't even remember. I feel like we started them in middle school, but maybe it wasn't until high school. And it was so our school could continue getting grant money because they were trying to get laptops for all the students. And then my grade didn't end up being a class that got laptops. So whole other TED talk on that. But we'll go into Harris's stance to start. So her 5 key points were universal pre-K, expanded career and technical education, a reduced emphasis on standardized testing, efforts to improve teachers' working conditions, and increased federal funding for schools serving low-income families and special education services. So, Kamala Harris's 2024 education stance emphasizes broad access to high quality education, including universal pre K and debt free community college, addressing disparities in K through 12 funding, expanding workforce development, and boosting teacher pay. Harris also champions civil rights protections in schools and supports the Biden administration's approach to student loan forgiveness and reform. Her education policies align with the Democratic platform's focus on equity and affordability in education.
Some of the stuff that I mentioned is specifically based on different articles that I've done research on. This one in particular from ABC News, it kind of expands on those 5 issues. Number one, Harris supports federal funding for low income schools, teacher salary increases, and student loan forgiveness. She also advocates for free community college and limited free 4 year college. The Biden Harris administration secured billions of dollars to increase federal funding for schools that largely serve low income families, directing billions towards resources and funding for low income schools, but also increased funding to special education services, career and technical education, and English language learning programs. Harris has spoken out in favor of 21st century community learning centers, which host programs predominantly for students who are in high poverty and low performing schools, and gaining early awareness and readiness for undergraduate programs, which provides year long grants for services at high poverty middle and high schools. She has also spoken out against efforts to ban books and restrict classroom content regarding race, specifically at Florida, but I'm sure other states as well. When Harris first ran for president in 2019, she proposed closing the teacher pay gap, between teachers and other professions that require a college degree. She said that there would be a 13,500 salary bump for teachers at schools nationwide, continue to report staffing shortages and poor funding. Essentially, that's the correlation. Harris has long been a proponent of free 2-year college tuition for most students and for free 4-year college and trade school tuition for students from lower and middle income families. And last but not least, Harris proposed increasing funding for HBCUs in her first presidential run, particularly focusing on training for Black educators. The Biden-Harris administration sent more than $16 billion in funding and investments to these schools from 2021 to 2024. So now, Trump's stance. I want to preface this by a video that I recently saw circulating, and it took me a while to find. And I told Elvis there was a specific video that I saw on Instagram that someone posted, and I went on this like goose chase to find it because I think it's important that you guys watch it. So it was posted by someone on X and or Twitter, called their user was like AntTunes1. So we're gonna link the video in the description that you can watch on your own time. But basically, we're gonna break down everything that was mentioned in this video.
Okay, so this is 10 key ideas for empowerment in great schools, which I also want to say that if you go and look at the GOP plan, a lot of this aligns with what is specifically in there. So it's not anything like new or crazy in this video. It just like breaks it all down in one specific place without having to do a bunch of reading and trying to get through understanding political plans, which if you don't have background in that, it would be a lot to try and sit and read that. So, one, respect the right of parents to control the education of their children. Two, empower parents and local school boards to hire and reward great principals and teachers, and also to fire the poor ones, the ones whose performance is unsatisfactory. I also want to note there that teachers are licensed. Just saying that teachers are licensed individuals. You have to pass tests to become a teacher. It is just like being a nurse or a doctor. You have to be licensed.
And also, all of this is verbatim that he said in the video, by the way.
Yes. Ensure our classrooms are focused not on political indoctrination, but on teaching the knowledge and skills needed to succeed: reading, writing, math, science, arithmetic, and other truly useful subjects. Teach students to love their country, not to hate their country like they are taught right now. Support bringing back prayer to our schools. Achieve schools that are safe, secure, and drug-free with immediate expulsion of any student who harms a teacher or another student. Give all parents the right to choose another school for their children if they want. It's called school choice. Ensure students have access to project-based learning experiences inside the classroom to help train them for meaningful work outside the classroom. Strive to give all students access to internships and work experience that can set them on a path to their first job. And ensure all schools provide excellent jobs and career counseling so that high school and college students can get a head start on jobs and careers best suited for their God-given talents. I also just want to say, I feel like in most areas of the country, I mean, maybe this is just a Pennsylvania thing, you kind of have the option to go to vocational school when you're in high school or to stay on the college track in your regular high school.
In New Jersey, at least in Bergen County, we have most people either end up deciding if they're going to go to a public school, go to like one of those vocational or technical schools, or go to a Catholic, etc. kind of thing, a school, religious-based school. So bringing back point number 5, support bringing prayer to our schools. That's a red flag for me, especially given in some areas that are very diverse, like New Jersey, where there are more than one culture and religions that go to public schools. So I'm gonna assume, and this is just me rereading this, especially given the fact that he mentioned God in the last one. I'm assuming this is Christianity. And while most of our country is probably Christian and or Catholic, which they're like this,
Or Orthodox.
or Orthodox, that would be a problem for everybody else that don't practice Christianity and practice, other religions. So I'm just gonna leave it at that. Just something to keep in mind. So anyway, back to what we mentioned about the Department of Education earlier. One thing that he mentioned also in this video is the fact that he wants to close up the Department of Education in Washington, D.C., and send all education and working needs back to the state. So basically, sending all the funding that is given to the Department of Education back to the states. And he wants the states to run the education of children because they will do a much better job of it. And because of the fact that the government spends more money per pupil by 3 times than any other nation, but somehow we're still at the bottom. He believes that people that work in the Department of Education that hate children. Those are his words, not ours. Another thing to note is that some other presidential candidates and senators have tried to eliminate the Department of Education, including Ronald Reagan in 1980. Bob Doyle argued in favor of eliminating it in his 1996 Republican campaign against Bill Clinton, and both Senators Ted Cruz from Texas and Rand Paul from Kentucky. And I'll let Elle talk a little bit more about Project 2025 in this matter.
Which we also, once again, just disclaiming, he now claims that Project 2025 was not written for him and he knows nothing about it. But sources say otherwise. So here is the Project 2025 education kind of plan. Calls for the allocations of the department's programs to other areas in the federal government. Civil rights enforcement in schools, for instance, would be the responsibility of the Justice Department rather than the education. So, taking away things like Title IX that protects students and college campuses from assault. 3, the student loan program would move to a new sector in cooperation with the Treasury Department. Other programs would move to the Department of Health and Human Services, and it calls to eliminate Title I funding, which supports students from low-income families, and instead dole out block grants to states without spending oversight, cut the Head Start program, which the Center for American Progress warns would restrict access to children in rural areas and exacerbate inequalities among families with young children, and roll back Biden-era Title IX revisions that prohibit discrimination in schools based on sexual orientation and gender identity.
I want to add something. I actually went to a Head Start program when I was a child, and so did a majority of my cousins on my dad's side, mainly because my grandmother, my paternal grandmother, she was a bus driver for the Head Start in my hometown. And so we all went there, and I have to say, like, I mean, me personally, I think pre-K and other like primary like child education, like for young children before they get to kindergarten, is really imperative for a lot of reasons. Besides providing structure for children, and obviously, many parents do use that as a way to, get childcare, but they do provide early education, and I think, it's important before even, getting into a kindergarten classroom. Like, children need to learn like how to socialize with other students, how to, what's fair and right and sharing and all these different little things that they teach at such a young age. But yeah, that for me is a issue, just something to consider.
I personally didn't go to pre-K, Head Start, or any form of daycare as a child. My mom had the ability and time to be able to teach me, and I actually ended up starting school early. I was in kindergarten when I was 4. I actually went to college at 17 because of that. And they wanted me to skip a grade in elementary school as well. So I would have been going to college at 16. They wanted me to go straight from second to fourth grade because I was so far ahead. But not everyone has the privilege of being able to do that with their children. And, I was still on par with everyone, but I had severe anxiety still due to this day and did not have any socialization aside from my family members until I went to kindergarten. So it was kind of difficult for me to make friends at first. So I do think that it also is very important for social aspects. And I know in Pennsylvania specifically, because I know someone that used to own a daycare, you also have to have an early childhood learning curriculum if you even just own a daycare for children. So that's also something that that's state mandated. That's not federally mandated, but that is something that also is required here. So definitely interesting to think about early education and things like that. But yeah, I totally agree with you, Amaya, that it can be a big use for childcare and things like that. And a lot of people don't have the privilege that my mom had to be able to spend that time with me and teach me whenever I was that young. But now we shall move into reproductive freedom and abortion this election, which is something I am very passionate about. We're also going to be talking about contraception. So
We're both passionate about it, by the way. Not just Elle more than me, but yeah.
So we're going to start with Harris's stance, and this is once again the Q&A version of Washington Post article, and we then will talk about some other things below it. But the first thing is, do you support a federal ban on abortion? Harris's stance, she strongly rejected efforts to restrict abortion access, including a national ban, blaming Trump for the Supreme Court's reversal of Roe v. Wade. And she says it created a horrific, heartbreaking reality, direct quote, and urging Congress to pass a national law codifying abortion rights. She has made championing reproductive health as a centerpiece of her vice presidency and her 2024 presidential campaign. She said in September she supported rolling back the filibuster, a procedural hurdle requiring 60 Senate votes to reinstate Roe v. Wade as law of the land, which is a very big deal to roll back filibuster to get something passed.
Next question is, at what point in a pregnancy do you believe abortion should be banned? At all points, at 6-week gestation, 15 weeks, some other time. Harris wants to restore Roe v. Wade, which protects abortion up until the time of fetal viability, or about 22 weeks, but she also, as a senator, opposed the bill that would ban abortion after 20 weeks of pregnancy.
So there's a little information on that. The next question is, do you support exceptions to abortion bans in case of rape, incest, threat to life of the mother and or health of the mother? If not, do you support any exceptions? Harris has been a leading voice on reproductive rights as vice president and co-sponsored a 2017 legislation as a senator that would have prohibited states from imposing restrictions on abortion.
Last, should the FDA approval of mifepristone be revoked? Yeah.
That's how you say it. It's the abortion.
Chemical. Yeah. Chemicals. How, if at all, would you seek to restrict abortion pills flowing into states where abortion is illegal? The Supreme Court in June sided with the Biden-Harris administration in preventing it from becoming more difficult to access the abortion medication mifepristone. A White House statement from Harris's office in March said, "Our administration will not waver in our dedication to preserving access to essential medication and defending the FDA's independent, evidence-based approval and regulation of safe and effective drugs."
So now we're just going to go into some policy record on abortion because I think it is important to know what things were tried to happen, what things did happen, and kind of have a history of policy whenever it comes to this topic specifically because of overturning of Roe v. Wade. As an outspoken defender of reproductive rights and leading voice of the Biden-Harris administration's stance on abortion, they have highlighted the harmful impacts from the Dobbs ruling and advocated for protecting abortion access, including for travel, privacy, emergency care, and bodily autonomy. As part of the National Fight for Reproductive Freedoms tour, she was the only vice president or president like nominee to visit a Planned Parenthood clinic while in office. She supports a federal law to restore Roe v. Wade's national standards of abortion legality up to viability, and has also stated she supports eliminating the Senate filibuster to do so. The administration's FDA revised restrictions on medication abortion pills, that's the mifepristone, allowing dispensing via certified pharmacies and telehealth. And the administration issued guidance affirming that abortions performed to stabilize the health of people experiencing pregnancy-related emergencies are protected by the Federal Emergency Medical Treatment and Active Labor Act, even if the states that had abortion bans. So this is thing like ectopic pregnancies that can eventually lead to sepsis. The administration has defended abortion access and the administration's actions in two major Supreme Court cases on medication abortion and emergency abortions. The administration strengthened HIPAA protections for data privacy, adding non-discrimination protections for people seeking abortion care, and defends right to travel to seek abortions. The administration revoked Trump's Mexico City policy restrictions, and as a U.S. Senator, opposed the Hyde Amendment and co-sponsored Women's Health Protection Act, which would have blocked states from imposing restrictive policies, access to abortion, and voted against a bill that would have banned abortions later in pregnancy. As Attorney General in California, she supported state's Reproductive Fact Act, requiring so-called crisis pregnancy centers, or CPCs, to post information about availability of free and low-cost contraceptions and abortion services in the state. And during the 2020 primary, while Roe v. Wade was still in place, she proposed a pre-clearance requirement that states trying to pass pre-viability abortion restrictions must obtain federal approval. So now we'll be talking about contraception.
Harris supports ACA and its contraceptive coverage requirement, and the Biden-Harris administration defended challenged preventative services requirements in the Braidwood case. The administration restored rules of federal Title X family planning program requiring participating entities to offer full range of contraceptives, pregnancy options, counseling, including abortion referral, and reallowing clinics that also offer abortion services with non-federal funds to qualify for the program. The administration's FDA approved first over-the-counter oral contraceptive pills and supports increased access and full coverage, and supports policies to expand access to contraceptives for military members and dependents. So now let's get into Trump's stance.
So at the beginning of this, the Washington Post did preface it with Donald Trump's position on federal ban of abortion is unclear, including at what point in pregnancy he thinks a ban should take effect. So a lot of this is going to be talking about Trump's history of these kinds of policies, because there really wasn't a ton of things that he directly said or were specifically put out as policies. It was that whole concepts of a plan type thing whenever it came to this issue. So they are going more based off of the history of Trump whenever he was elected previously. So do you support a federal ban on abortion? The answer is, while he calls himself the most pro-life president in history, Trump has also kind of waffled considerably over the years on abortion policy. His latest position is that abortion policy should be set by the states, and his vice presidential nominee, J.D. Vance, has said he would veto a national abortion ban, though Trump disavowed having talked to Vance about it and has not clarified if he would veto a national ban. He promised his administration would be great for women and their reproductive rights, direct quote. and called for the government or private insurances to or private insurers to pay for IVF treatment, which is a flip from what other Republicans were wanting with IVF.
So, next question. At what point in pregnancy do you believe abortion should be banned? At all points, 6 weeks, 15, etc. Trump ignited a firestorm in the anti abortion community in September when he called a Florida abortion ban at 6 weeks too strict and suggested he might vote for a ballot referendum allowing abortion in Florida until fetal viability. One day later, he backed off that stance and said he would vote against the ballot amendment, allowing the 6 week measure to remain. Broadly, he said abortion limits should be left up to the states.
And if you look historically at Trump's stance on abortion, he doesn't ever really say anything unless people start attacking him for something he said. So the next one is, do you support exceptions to abortion bans in cases of rape, incest, and threat to the mother's life? And the answer is yes. President Trump supports exceptions for rape, incest, and life of the mother. Campaign spokesman Steve Chung said in a statement to the Washington Post.
Last, should the FDA approval of mifepristone be revoked? I'm never going to say that word right. In August, Trump suggested at a news conference he was open to using federal regulatory power as a president to restrict access to the drug. He had previously praised a Supreme Court decision that maintained access to the drug, and his spokeswoman said following that decision and the news conference that the court had decided and the matter is settled.
So once again, not really taking a full stance on it, just kind of letting people decide. The states can decide, whatever. So his abortion policy record. So he takes credit for overturning Roe v. Wade by appointing 3 anti-choice judges to the Supreme Court, claiming, direct quote, after 50 years of failure with nobody coming even close, I was able to kill Roe v. Wade. Has said he would consider a national 15 or 16-week ban on abortion, but more recently has said he supports leaving abortion policy to states, which allows full bans to stay in effect, and tweeted he would veto a federal abortion ban, supports exceptions in case of rape, incest, and to save the life of the mother. Has stated that he would generally not use the Comstock Act to ban mail delivery of medication abortion pills, but will be coming out with specifics to be announced, I guess. Administration issued regulations that blocked clinicians from providing counseling that includes abortion information or referrals in clinics that receive federal Title X family planning funds. And he reinstated and expanded Mexico City policy prohibiting U.S. global health funds from going to foreign NGOs that perform or promote abortions.
So, contraception. So, Trump prohibited family planning clinics such as Planned Parenthood that offer abortion services with separate funding from receiving funds from the federal Title X family planning program, leading to the disqualification or departure of approximately 1,000 sites, which is about 25% of participating clinics. He also issued regulations allowing nearly any employer with a religious or moral objection an exemption from the ACA's contraceptive coverage requirement and approved Texas's Medicaid program waiver blocking Medicaid payments to Planned Parenthood and other clinics for non-abortion family planning services and excluding coverage of emergency contraceptive pills in state's family program.
Now we
So,
shall move on.
to immigration.
I'll go ahead and start. I'm just taking a second. All right. So we'll start with Harris's stance, as we have stated we are doing. So Harris emphasized her experience as Attorney General of California prosecuting cross-border crimes such as drug trafficking and human trafficking to distinguish herself from Trump. If elected, she would likely continue to support US government efforts that she has been leading as vice president to increase public and private investments in Central America to address the root cause of migration. She would also likely continue the government's work to create and expand legal avenues for immigration, such as refugee settlement, work visas, and parole to reduce pressure on the US Mexico border. She would also be expected to pursue enhanced migration management, cooperation with other countries in the hemisphere by encouraging the other 21 signatories to implement the Los Angeles Declaration on Migration and Protection. Individually, none of these programs or initiatives would be expected to reduce or alter migration flows immediately or significantly. However, when coupled with other policies, they serve as building blocks for creating a more enduring migration management system that promotes safe, legal, and orderly migration.
Vice President Harris. She, during this time, also advocated for a bipartisan approach that focused on increasing investments in border security and establishing legal pathways for eligible immigrants. Her plan emphasized addressing the root causes of migration, fostering transparency in the immigration process, and operating within the existing frameworks of Congress and the judiciary. This proposal underscores Harris' commitment to checks and balances, safeguarding democratic processes, and ensuring fair immigration outcomes. Her approach also promotes economic stability by retaining immigrant labor in vital industries like agriculture, construction, and hospitality. These sectors would otherwise suffer workforce shortages, which would affect food prices and housing costs. Her bipartisan plan aims to strengthen these industries without compromising democratic norms, ensuring a fair, just approach that aligns with America's values of opportunity and justice.
During her time as vice president, Harris focused on addressing the root cause of migration from Central America. As part of her efforts to mitigate the border crisis, she worked with Mexican and Guatemalan leaders to improve conditions in these countries. So, Kamala Harris's evolving immigration stance. As a former attorney general and current vice president, Harris's approach has shifted to emphasize both enforcement and pathways to citizenship, blending a firm stance on border security with humanitarian reforms. It's a reviving of the bipartisan security legislation. Harris supports a previously blocked bipartisan border security bill, which focuses on increasing funding for border agents, expanding detention facilities, and enhancing asylum processing. She wanted to tackle root causes of migration. Harris's policies aim not only at border security, but also at addressing root causes of migration, such as poverty and violence in Central America, differentiating her approach from her predecessors, and finally balancing the immigration reforms. Unlike Trump's enforcement heavy policies or Biden's initially more lenient stance, Harris seeks a middle ground that secures borders while providing legal pathways for undocumented immigrants. So, really, that focus on proper systems for immigration.
Her stance has made border security, along with her support for a bipartisan bill, as already mentioned, to increase funding for border agents. And this bill was actually blocked earlier this year. And Harris has been vocal about her intent to revive this legislation if she were elected, and portraying herself as a candidate serious about securing the border. Her security policies also have included cracking down on transnational gangs and human traffickers. This bill was supported by a range of stakeholders, including the Border Patrol Union and the Chamber of Commerce, which aim to increase funding for border agents, expand detention facilities, and improve the asylum process. The bill proposed adding over 1,500 new Customs and Border Protection personnel, increase the number of asylum officers, and expand detention capacity by adding 10,000 more beds to Immigration and Customs Enforcement, also known as ICE, facilities. It also included provisions for combating drug trafficking, particularly targeting the flow of fentanyl across the border, and provided 1.4 billion in support for cities and states that are assisting new arrivals.
So now we will move on to Trump's stance. As president, Trump implemented sweeping policies to combat irregular immigration and reduce legal immigration using the vast powers of federal government, including diplomatic pressure and coercion, to pursue this agenda. If reelected in 2024, he has promised to terminate every open border policy of the Biden administration. Direct quote. He has also vowed to, another direct quote, restore all of his prior policies and take additional steps, some of which would likely push the outward limits of the US law. Trump says he would take on his first day in the White House and, direct quote again, begin the largest deportation operation in American history. Trump's campaign said he would marshal every federal and state power necessary for the purpose. In the 2016 campaign, Trump focused extensively on his promise to build a wall across the US-Mexico border. And his 2024 campaign, he has focused more on reinstating his border and asylum policies. At a campaign event, Trump did not rule out reviving zero tolerance, one of his most controversial immigration policies. Pursuant to this 2018 policy, immigrant families who crossed the US-Mexico border were separated, children were placed in US custody and reunified with other family members, while parents were criminally charged and deported.
So this next part is directly from his RNC. It's on the GOP website and it's also on his website directly. So, and the other part is from Forbes.com. So Trump's approach centers on a forceful enforcement strategy that includes the mass deportation of over 11 million undocumented immigrants. His plan relies on centralizing power within the executive branch, bypassing Congress as needed. This unilateral vision would significantly expand ICE detention facilities and establish over 1,000 new immigration courts to expedite cases, which projected costs potentially reaching $315 billion for immediate implementation and up to $88 billion annually if phased in. So now directly from his site, and this is all verbatim, might I add. Republicans offer an aggressive plan to stop the open border policies that have opened the floodgates to a tidal wave of illegal aliens, deadly drugs, and migrant crime. We will end the invasion at the southern border, restore law and order, protect American sovereignty, and deliver a safe and prosperous future for all Americans. So, number one, he wants to secure the border. Number two, he wants to enforce immigration laws by strengthening ICE. And this includes increasing penalties for illegal entry, overstaying visas, and reinstate remain in Mexico and other policies that help reduce illegal immigration by historic lows in his first term. Number three is to begin the largest deportation program in American history. Number four, strict vetting, which is to use existing federal law to keep foreign Christian-hating communists, Marxists, and socialists out of America. Those who join our country must love our country. We will use extreme vetting to ensure that jihadists and jihadist sympathizers are not admitted. Number five, stop sanctuary cities. Republicans will cut federal funding to sanctuary jurisdictions that release dangerous illegal alien criminals onto our streets rather than handing them over to ICE. there are a few sanctuary cities across the US, and New York City is one of the biggest ones. And last but not least, ensure our legal immigration system puts American workers first. So, Republicans will prioritize merit-based immigration and ensure those admitted to our country contribute positively to our society and economy and never become a drain on public resources. So,
Also, with number two, he wants to reinstate the travel bans.
yeah, that's another big one. And I mean, again, with securing the border, we already mentioned he wants to continue building the wall. Another thing, he wants to deploy the U.S. Navy to impose a full fentanyl blockade on the waters of our region. And we'll do this by boarding and inspecting ships to look for fentanyl and precursors to fentanyl, and also use advanced technology to monitor and secure the border. So,
Which I personally want to know, if they're worried about stuff coming in on ships, why they aren't increasing the amount of customs officers for incoming goods. Because personally, as someone who gets goods in from out of the country for my business, I know how long it takes for packages to come through customs sometimes. And it is honestly the most annoying thing as a business owner when you're expecting something to be here in a certain amount of time. So if it's taking that long for me to get a package that is like just crystals, it's a small box of just crystals. How long is that going to add on to the process? You know what I'm saying? Like, are they going to increase the amount of people for customs as well? Or are they just going to put the Navy out there and that'll be their first line of defense? I don't know. That's something that, like, I could never make sense of because I know how it works getting packages in through customs, and it's the most frustrating thing ever.
yeah. And last but not least, we're so sorry that this is a very long episode, but the last one is civil liberties and the discussion of gay marriage and gender affirming care.
Oh, this is not the last one.
Oh,
We
we
also
have two more.
about we no, we're talking about the climate crisis and healthcare as well.
I lied.
My lied.
I lied. I'm so
It's
sorry,
okay. This
guys.
was like more so my part of the document, but we will try to make this quicker, be as quick as we can. We've been here already for an hour and a half. Okay, so Harris's stance as far as gay marriage and gender affirming care. So Harris has generally been an early adopter of pro LGBTQ policies and stances, doing so before the prominent members of her party. The former San Francisco district attorney officiated some of the nation's first same-sex marriages in 2004 after the then mayor, Gavin Newsom, directed the county clerk to approve the marriages, although the law didn't yet recognize them. The marriages were invalidated months later. Then, when she was elected as California's Attorney General in 2010, Harris said she would not defend in court a voter-approved measure known as Proposition 8, which outlawed same-sex marriage. As district attorney, Harris has prosecuted violence against LGBTQ people, establishing a hate crime unit to look into crimes against LGBTQ youth. As attorney general, she sought to end the panic defense that allowed homicide defendants to seek lesser sentences if they attested to being panicked by the victim's sexual orientation. Harris has been criticized by LGBTQ advocates for denying gender affirming surgeries for transgender inmates. When she served as Attorney General, she said she was bound by the Department of Corrections policy in place at the time. She later expressed support for providing such care to inmates during her 2020 presidential bid. During that campaign, she ran on a more progressive platform. Harris also said she supports decriminalizing sex work, though she noted that it's not a simple issue to go through. As a senator, Harris sponsored a handful of bills aimed at addressing addressing discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity, along with other LGBTQ issues. Harris's record has also been tied to the Biden administration, which expanded Title IX protections for LGBTQ students, although they were blocked by the Supreme Court. In 2022, Mr. Biden signed the Respect for Marriage Act into law and enshrining federal protections for same-sex and interracial marriages. Harris' running mate, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, has a reputation as an advocate for LGBTQ rights. When Walz was a high school teacher, he served as the faculty advisor who helped form his school's first gay-straight alliance in the 90s.
So, health policies in the LGBTQ plus community. So she made campaign commitment to work to pass the Equality Act, which would provide non-discrimination protections for LGBTQ plus people, work to expand and protect rights and access to healthcare as the Attorney General of California, as U.S. Senator from California, and through the Biden-Harris administration, as Attorney General of California, supported marriage equality, which has implications for healthcare access. As U.S. Senator, she introduced a bill seeking to include identity in the U.S. Census, which has implications for identifying healthcare trends for the population, co-sponsored the Health Equity and Accountability Act and the Equality Act, bills seeking to promote equity, access, and data collection, including the healthcare for LGBTQ people, among others, and introduced the PrEP Access and Coverage Act, which is a bill that aims to increase access to PrEP and HIV prevention medication. The Biden-Harris administration issued guidance and regulations on Section 1557 of the ACA, which provided the broadest protections to date in healthcare based on gender identity and sexual orientation for transgender people and for gender affirming care. The administration enacted the Respect for Marriage Act, which enshrined the right for same-sex couples to marry into law. The administration modernized FDA restrictions on blood donation to align with risk rather than identity. The administration issued regulation providing protections for LGBTQ people in HHS grants and services. They also rescinded the Trump administration regulatory expansions of conscious that had created potential opportunities for LGBTQ-based discrimination, which multiple federal courts had found to be unlawful. The administration intervened through the Department of Justice to support plaintiffs in lawsuits challenging state bans on youth access to gender-affirming care and has requested SCOTUS review state of the law. The administration issued executive orders seeking to advance equity for LGBTQ people and adopted a federal evidence agenda on LGBTQ equity and an HHS action-wide plan promoting sexual orientation and gender identity data collection and equity in federal programs and surveys.
Now we will move on to Trump's stance. This kind of encapsulates from 2016 to now. So Trump said during the 2016 campaign that he would strongly consider appointing Supreme Court justices who would overturn the 2015 ruling that legalized same-sex marriages. Then, days after he was elected, he said he was fine with same-sex marriages and suggested he wouldn't appoint justices to the high court with the goal of overturning the ruling. His wife, Melania Trump, called him the first president to enter the White House supporting gay marriage as he sought for re-election in 2020. On transgender issues, Trump said in 2016, amid a controversy over the North Carolina bathroom ban, that transgender people should, and this is a direct quote, use the bathroom they feel is appropriate. But his administration went on to reverse a policy that required schools to allow transgender students to use bathrooms that corresponded with their gender identity. And his administration banned some transgender people from serving in the military while Trump was in office, a policy that Biden reversed. Trump's administration also tried to repeal health protections for transgender people and sought to end protections for transgender individuals in federal prison, among other policies. Anti-trans sentiments would go on to become prominent talking point for the Republicans on the campaign trail in 2022 midterm elections and in early 2023. Trump said he would use his power should he return to the White House to punish doctors who provide gender-affirming care for minors and impose consequences for teachers who discuss it with students. In the final months of the 2024 campaign, Trump and his allies leaned into anti-trans rhetoric, spending millions on advertisements focusing on the issue in battleground states. Meanwhile, Trump's running mate, Senator J.D. Vance, sponsored legislation in 2023 that would ban access to gender-affirming care for minors, along with a bill to bar the State Department from allowing the gender marker X on passports. The Ohio Republican also said he would vote no on the Respect of Marriage Act, which provided federal protections for same-sex and interracial marriages, while campaigning for Senate in 2022, citing religious liberties concerns. Now, their views on LGBTQ health.
So he worked to restrict or remove LGBT rights and access to health care, issued revised regulations on Section 1557 of the ACA, which removed protections in healthcare based on gender identity and sexual orientation, created Division of Conscience and Religious Freedom at HHS, and issued final conscious regulations broadening non-discrimination protections for healthcare entities to include conscious and executive order directing federal agencies to expand religious protections and actions that created opportunities for LGBTQ-based discrimination in certain circumstances. He removed and sought to curtail data collection on sexual orientation and gender identity in federal surveys, and proposes to prohibit gender-affirming care for young people and limit for people of any age nationwide, including prohibiting the use of federal funds for these services.
Now we will move on to the climate crisis. Wow. Climate crisis in this election. So once again, going back to the Washington Post Q&A version of this, the first question for Harris's stance is, do you believe the climate change is largely driven by human activity, including the burning of fossil fuels? If not, is there a different cause you would cite? Harris calls climate change an existential threat and says the United States needs to act urgently to address it. As a presidential candidate in 2019, she released a $10 trillion climate plan that calls for investing in renewable energy, holding polluters accountable, helping communities affected by climate change, and protecting natural resources. As California Attorney General, she prosecuted oil companies for environmental violations. As Vice President, she was the tie-breaking vote in the Senate for the Inflation Reduction Act, which provided about $370 billion to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to 40% below their 2005 levels by the end of the decade.
Do you believe climate change is making disasters such as hurricanes, wildfires, and heat waves more intense? Harris said that the United States must take action to fight climate change in the face of increasing drought, floods, hurricanes, wildfires, and sea level rise. As Vice President, Harris announced that more than $1 billion in grants in 2022 for states to address flooding and extreme heat exacerbated by climate change. This direct quote where she said, "The frequency has accelerated in a relatively short period of time. The science is clear. Extreme weather will only get worse and the climate crisis will only accelerate."
Should climate change be addressed through government action or market forces? The Biden-Harris administration's signature Inflation Reduction Act represents the largest infusion of government cash into climate and clean energy initiatives Harris and Biden sought to put the U.S. on a path to cutting greenhouse gas emissions in half by 2030. Under Harris's climate plan as a 2019 presidential candidate, she advocated for a blend of government action and market forces to combat global warming. A direct quote, a climate pollution fee can play an important role as one of several interrelated policies to reduce emissions and hold polluters accountable. However, history shows us that reliance on market mechanisms alone can often leave communities behind.
Last, to support clean energy tax credits, such as those for electric vehicles. In 2022, Harris cast a tie-breaking vote to pass the Inflation Reduction Act, which provides hundreds of billions of dollars in government subsidies for electric cars and other clean energy technology, including tax credits for clean energy and energy efficiency home projects. She has been a proponent of electric vehicles and, as a senator, supported a national zero emissions vehicle standard. In May, she visited Detroit to announce federal grants for smaller companies making electric vehicle parts.
So now we'll move on to Trump's stance on the climate crisis. So do you believe that climate change is largely driven by human activity, etc.? Trump believes human activity is just one cause of climate change, not necessarily the dominant factor. Pressed in a 2020 debate about whether human pollution contributes to warming, Trump said, direct quote, I think a lot of things do, but I think to an extent, yes. Trump told the Washington Post editorial board in 2016 that he is, direct quote, not a great believer in man-made climate change. He also long rejected climate science, sometimes calling global warming a hoax.
Do you believe climate change is making disasters such as hurricanes, wildfires, and heat waves more intense? At a rally in March 2022, Trump mocked the threat posed by sea level rise and the nation's concern with combating climate change. And direct quote, and yet you have people like John Kerry worrying about the climate. Trump said, oh, I heard that the other day, here we are, Russian President Vladimir Putin is threatening us, and he's worried about the ocean will rise 100% over the next F word years. In 2019, Trump also exclusively blamed forest mismanagement for more destructive and deadly wildfires rather than climate change. Scientists have said no amount of forest management can stop wildfires in a more flammable world.
Should climate change be addressed through the government or market forces? During his 4 years in office, Trump aggressively targeted and rolled back more than 125 rules and policies meant to protect the environment and lower planet warming emissions.
Do you support clean energy tax credits, such as those for electric vehicles? In a 2023 campaign ad, Trump promised to roll back President Biden's electric vehicle policies and subsidies. Biden is spending billions and billions of taxpayer dollars subsidizing electric cars for rich people while normal Americans can't afford to use one, nor do they even want to. Trump said, I saved the American auto industry once and I will now save it again.
And now we will move on to healthcare. So, healthcare in this election has been a big conversation, especially with Medicare specifically, but also the Affordable Care Act, which is, going back to the Obamacare plans and things like that. So we will start with Harris's stance as a person with a chronic illness. This is something I already knew a lot about with this election. I did my research on this before voting, but I feel like a lot of people don't really care that much about healthcare because if you're healthy and able-bodied, you don't really think about it. However, if you are not, it is something that is very big on your mind. And when you're 24 years old and going to be sick the rest of your life, you kind of got to make decisions about your well-being. So Harris's stance on the Affordable Care Act, the Biden-Harris administration enacted the American Rescue Plan Act, which temporarily expanded eligibility for an increased ACA marketplace subsidies. These were extended by the Inflation Reduction Act through 2025. The administration fixed the family glitch, allowing dependents of people with unaffordable employer-based family coverage to receive ACA subsidies. The administration reversed Trump administration expansion of short-term plans and restored outreach and enrollment assistance and funding. The administration achieved record high enrollment in ACA marketplace plans and proposes to build on provisions in the IRA, which is the Inflation Act, by making permanent the expanded ACA subsidies.
Medicaid, championed by Biden-Harris administration efforts to reduce maternal mortality and morbidity, including encouraging states to adopt the postpartum Medicaid coverage extension. The administration also supported legislation to establish a federal option to close the coverage gap, which was not passed by Congress, and passed a fiscal incentive for states to newly adopt the ACA Medicaid expansion. The administration withdrew demonstration waivers approved in the Trump administration related to work requirements and encouraged waivers to expand coverage, reduce health disparities, address the social determinants of health, and help individuals transition out of incarceration. And this administration issued comprehensive regulations and guidance to streamline enrollment, promote continuity of coverage, and to help bolster access in fee-for-service managed care.
So Medicaid is left up to the states at this point if you're someone that is eligible for it, or programs that are considered Medicaid in your state based off of you are lower income, but you aren't like to the point where you get completely free insurance. There are like plans where you can pay certain amounts, but it's less than like what normal insurance would cost. Just so you have kind of an idea, that does differ from state to state, but they are trying to push more federal things to help bolster those programs in each state. Prescription costs, as Vice President Harris cast the tie-breaking vote in the US Senate for the Inflation Reduction Act, which requires the government to negotiate prices for some Medicare-covered drugs, with the number growing over time. It requires drug companies to pay rebates if prices rise faster than inflation caps out-of-pocket drug spending. Limits monthly insulin cost to $35 for Medicare beneficiaries in Part B and all Part D plans, improves financial assistance for low-income beneficiaries, and other changes. Proposes to accelerate Medicare price negotiations of drugs. The Democratic platform calls for 50 drugs per year and extend $35 insulin copay cap and drug out-of-pocket cap to all Americans, just not those on Medicare. Also stated that she will increase competition and transparency, starting with cracking down on pharmaceutical companies blocking competition and abusive practices for the drug middleman. So a pharmaceutical company basically trying to own one type of drug and no one else being able to make it. The administration approved Florida's plan to import some prescription drugs from Canada. Implementation contingent on further action by Florida. The administration delayed implementation of the Trump administration's drug rebate rule until 2032, which will delay projected increases in Medicare spending. And the administration established a voluntary model to increase access to cell and gene therapies for people with Medicaid.
So now Medicare.
I was just going to say, cell and gene therapies can be used in a lot of things, including cancer treatments. So they need to be affordable for people that qualify for Medicaid programs.
And now Medicare. So Biden-Harris administration proposes to protect Medicare for future generations, in part by extending solvency of the Medicare Part A trust fund by raising Medicare taxes on high earners and closing tax loopholes, and proposes to expand Medicare and Social Security. Details were not specified. They propose expanding home care services under Medicare to help people with functional or cognitive impairments. See also long-term care, and adds a vision and hearing benefit to Medicare paid for by expanding Medicare drug negotiations and other policies. as vice president, cast a tie-breaking vote in the U.S. Senate for Inflation Reduction Act, which included several provisions to lower Medicare prescription drug expenses, including negotiated drug prices and a $35 monthly insulin cap. The administration expanded coverage of mental health services and to additional health care providers, so access to them. The administration extended broader coverage of telehealth through December 2024. The administration set new rules for Medicare Advantage insurers, including restrictions on prior authorization and marketing practices, and established new staffing requirements for Medicare certified nursing facilities. And during the 2019 Democratic presidential primary, supported a Medicare for All approach with the role for private insurance. However, her campaign has since indicated she would not seek to advance Medicare for All as president and has supported the ACA and expansions to broaden coverage and make healthcare more affordable.
Now, lastly, we're going to talk about mental health under Harris's stances. As vice president, she led the White House's blueprint for addressing the mental health crisis, which has taken steps to address maternal mental health, such as launching the National Maternal Mental Health Hotline, training providers on maternal mental health and substance use disorders, and calling on states to expand and extend Medicaid postpartum medical and mental health coverage. The Biden-Harris administration made investments to expand mental health and substance use treatment, including to children and families in underserved populations, and to address the mental health workforce shortage by increasing licensing flexibilities for social workers. The administration supported and enacted the Safe Communities Act, which included provisions to increase school behavioral health services, which was building on the administration's American Rescue Plan Act, and strengthen the state requirements for behavioral health care for Medicaid enrolled youth in response to worsening youth mental health. The administration enhanced behavioral health access opportunities for Medicaid enrollees by establishing maximum appointment wait times, surveying enrollee experiences, and adding rate transparency policies, which may result in improved rates and more provider participation. The administration expanded the Medicaid CCBHC demonstration by adding 10 new states to the program. The administration enhanced crisis by building up 988 and mobile crisis services and released the National Strategy for Suicide Prevention with focus on high-risk groups such as the LGBTQ+, veterans, moms, etc. The administration proposed update requirements for health plans in order to comply with mental health parity.
So now Trump's stance. So the ACA in 2017, he unsuccessfully attempted to repeal and replace the ACA with various plans that would have increased the number of uninsured Americans to 51 million. He prioritized enforcement of the individual mandate penalty, then reduced the penalty to $0, stopped payments for cost sharing subsidies, CSRs, which contributed to premiums increasing as well as federal subsidies growing, reduced funding for outreach, which may have contributed to enrollment stagnating, expanded non-ACA compliant short-term plans, which restrict coverage for pre-existing conditions, allowed enhanced direct enrollment in ACA plans through online brokers, and budget plans proposed that changes to the ACA that would weaken pre-existing protections and reduce funding substantially through a block grant to states. As a candidate for this election, he called to never give up on repealing the ACA, later adding Obamacare sucks and that he would replace it with much better health care. He also said that he was not running on terminating the ACA and would rather make it much, much better and far less money, though he has provided no specific plans.
So, as far as Medicaid is concerned, he supported unsuccessful efforts to repeal and replace the ACA, which we have already talked about, which this included Medicaid expansions and proposed restructuring of Medicaid financing. But as we said, this all failed under his previous presidency. And it was the point was to reduce Medicaid spending by roughly $1 trillion over 10 years. He approved waivers that included work requirements as a condition of Medicaid eligibility, premiums, and other eligibility restrictions. He took administrative action to relax Medicaid managed care rules and increase eligibility verification requirements. And he signed legislation that included a continuous enrollment requirement in exchange for enhanced federal Medicaid funding during the COVID-19 public health emergency.
For prescriptions, he established a voluntary model allowing participating Medicare Part D plans to limit monthly insulin costs to $35 in effect from 2021 to 2023. He created a new pathway to allow states to import prescription drugs from Canada. He proposed to eliminate drug rebates in Medicare Part D, which was projected to increase Part D premiums and Medicare spending while lowering out-of-pocket costs, which implementation subsequently delayed by legislation until 2032. He proposed to establish a most favored nation system of international reference prices for some Medicare-covered drugs, where U.S. prices would be based on prices in certain other countries, which was blocked by court action and later rescinded, and to require drug manufacturers to disclose drug prices in television ads, blocked by court ruling. According to the 2024 Trump campaign, there is no push to renew the most favored nations drug pricing policy, and he proposed several Medicare Part D benefit design changes, including an out-of-pocket cap and weaker formulary standards, which the proposals were not implemented.
Now, as far as Medicare goes, he promises to protect Medicare, Social Security, and patients with pre-existing conditions, including no changes to retirement age, etc. We talked about that. He proposes to eliminate taxes on Social Security benefits, which would accelerate insolvency of the Medicare hospital insurance and Social Security trust funds. He proposed various policies to reduce prescription drug prices, including the most favored nation system, which basically would ban drug rebates and prescription drug importation. According to the 2024 Trump campaign, there is no push to renew the most favored nation's drug pricing policy. We just spoke about that. He enacted tax reductions that accelerated the depletion of the Medicare Part A trust fund and repealed IPAB, a federal board that was designed to help slow the growth of Medicare spending. He signed legislation that expanded treatment for substance use disorders and other mental health conditions, allowing Medicare Advantage plans to offer additional benefits for chronically ill enrollees. He increased Medicare premiums for higher income beneficiaries, and he broadened coverage of telehealth, provided advanced payments to providers, and eased staffing requirements for Medicare certified nursing homes in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And now mental health.
He proposes a return to mental institutionalization, stating for those who are severely mental ill and deeply disturbed, we will bring them back to mental institutions where they belong, moving away from long-standing policies that provide treatment and living in community settings. He supported repeal of the ACA and cuts into Medicaid, which would reduce coverage and access to behavioral health services, and issued an executive order to expand non-ACA compliant short-term policies that often limit or exclude mental health services, and signed pandemic legislation CARES Act that included an expansion of certified community behavioral health clinics, CCBHCs, signed legislation that established the 988 hotline, and issued an executive order on veteran suicide. So, after all that, it's going to take some time for you to really understand all that. And we definitely suggest you guys look at the articles that we got our sources from, because it is a lot of information. But I think the most important thing, which we are about to talk about, which is media literacy, we implore you to understand where we come from when it comes to this. And we want you guys to know this is an actual set of ethics that journalists should follow. Obviously, there are journalists and people who work in media that don't follow it, but yeah, just
I also want to preface this section with Amaya and I went to school for communications. My focus was in convergent journalism.
mine was too, and then I
Okay.
changed it.
Yeah. So day one of a journalism class, the SPJ Code of Ethics is thrown in your face, and so is information about media literacy. It is like one
Yep.
of the most important things. And we also ran our student newspaper for 2 years during both an election cycle and the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah, we lived, ate, and breathed the SBJ Code of Ethics. So
With that being said, I feel like this is something that we are able to talk on with a certain expertise because we really created almost a 24-hour news cycle, not completely 24-hour, but a pretty close to one with our student newspaper during that time, which is kind of insane for a student newspaper. So we know how media sources work and we know what they should be doing and what they shouldn't be doing. With
and
that,
we did it for free, pretty much.
yeah, the the little scholarship we got was not not enough.
No.
But that's besides the point. So just to start off, media literacy, as defined by Oxford, is the ability to critically analyze stories presented in the mass media and to determine their accuracy and credibility. It is all about critical thinking. It is examining the BS that is thrown at you because no matter where you are consuming media, whether it is social media, whether it is through the news, whether you're reading articles online, you need to look at it through a critical lens.
And this is not just talking about the right side either. There's BS also coming from the left, so you really gotta listen and read between the lines.
Yes, but we're going to just break down real quick the SPJ Code of Ethics for you so you understand what journalists should be following and what kind of things you should question when they aren't being done in the media you are consuming. And I also will say we will be talking more about the fact that a lot of people on television news specifically do not have a background in journalism, but that'll be later. So, the first principle of the SPJ Code of Ethics is seek the truth and report it. The tenets under the first principle focus on accuracy of information being published with using original sources whenever possible, providing context for the reader when they wouldn't understand the information without it, update and correct stories as needed with new information, identify sources when possible and clearly identifying them, full names on first reference, allow for response from individuals who are being put under a critical lens in your news coverage. For example, if a company is called out for not allowing employees lunch breaks, asking the company for comment on the situation, not just taking the stories of the employees and running with it. Avoid undercover reporting unless traditional methods of information gathering won't work. This one I put direct quotes from the tenet itself. Recognize a special obligation to serve as watchdogs over public affairs and government. Just keep that in mind. Seek to ensure the public's business is conducted in the open and that public records are open to all. And that is the end of that full tenet. Have diversity in sources and avoid stereotyping. Label material if it is commentary, opinion based, or for advocacy purposes. Never distort facts and use illustrations that are correctly labeled, and never plagiarize. Always attribute your sources. That is why we always put our relevant links down below.
Number two, or principle two, is minimize harm. So the tenets under this second principle focus on finding balance between the public's need for information and potential harm caused to victims or families. Recognize a legal right to information isn't always a justification for publishing. Realize private persons have more rights to privacy of information than public officials. Balance a subject's right to a fair trial with a public need for information, and examine long term implications of publication and update information when needed. Again, that's a big one that you'll see, especially with developing news stories, and a lot of the news organizations do this, and if they don't, they need to be doing so, because you can't just post something and not clarify or update when there's new information.
Yeah, even like in local news rooms and posts, you'll see a lot of times where there's the original article and then I'll say update with the date and time and then another one, etc., until it's the finalized story. So, principle 3 is act independently. The tenets under this principle focus on avoiding conflicts of interest, refusing gifts or sources offering information in exchange for compensation, deny favored coverage to advertisers, and clearly show differences between news and advertising on your site.
Last but not least, principle 4 is to be accountable and transparent. The tenets under this principle focus on explaining ethics and choices in content published and responding to questions quickly and with accuracy, acknowledge mistakes and correct them, expose unethical conduct even within their own organization, and hold yourself accountable and others to the same standards.
So now we're going to talk about media literacy specifically in relation to the election, and we're just going to kind of examine a couple things in front of you, and we will have the links to them below. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is this interactive media bias chart. And something I just want to note on it is that many sources profiles include content samples from the like specific broadcasters, along with their reliability and bias ratings. Reliability scores for articles and shows are on a scale of 0 to 64. Scores above 40 are generally good. Scores below 24 are generally problematic. This is not like this is meant to see if there is bias first. That is the first object with the way that this was done. And then scores between 24 to 40 indicate a range of possibilities, with some sources falling be like there because they have a heavy opinion and then analysis, and some because they have high variation and reliability between articles depending on who is publishing or who is speaking on TV. Bias scores for articles and shows are on a scale of negative 42 to plus 42, with higher negative scores being more left and higher positive scores being more right, and scores closer to 0 being minimally biased, equally balanced, or exhibiting a centrist bias. So we looked at this, and I'm going to open it up on my laptop. If you want to open up to Amaya, we can talk about it a little bit. So it's an interactive media bias chart. It's by Adfonts Media, and they did like this analysis basically of the different like large media organizations as well as some smaller ones. And one of the like biggest things is they have the political bias on the bottom, but then they also on the left hand side have what kind of coverage and like how reliable it is for your like what's going to be the most reliable and the least bias. And you will see that the less bias it is, the more reliable they tend to get on the chart. There's a couple outliers, as there always is in statistics, but for the most part, the more reliable they are, the more central leaning they are. And this really just kind of goes through and shows like even podcasts and things. And we read an opinion piece about this that discussed things like Fox News and the Joe Rogan podcast and whatnot, and how media consumption highly can impact the results of the election depending on what you're consuming and what you perceive to be true. I encourage you all to go and look at this media bias chart. because it has a lot of sources that you probably wouldn't even think about looking at. You know, for the most part, we all kind of know which television news stations lean left and right, but one of the closer to the middle road ones is CBS and CNN, if you look at their actual. And I want to say about CNN specifically is they have a lot more broadcast journalists on staff compared to many other news organizations that are actually like the broadcast journalists are in front of the camera. There may be journalists employed at these other places, but they are not in front of the camera. And that's how you end up getting these opinion based pieces. Do you want to say anything about this, Maya? I just thought this chart was very interesting.
I would say that one thing about media is that you have to look at both sides of the picture. And although you might be like, let's for example say you hear about it, let's say Trump puts a new policy out about immigration. Fox is more likely to report because they're more right leaning that it's going to be a great for our country XYZ. It's going to be how it will benefit American citizens, blah blah blah, XYZ, this, that, and the third. Now, maybe CNN or like maybe NBC, for example, will probably say what's opposite of that. But the thing about media literacy and the thing about getting your information from these mediums, and not just the top five like ABC, CNN, NBC, etc., you gotta find where the middle lies. You have to like, and this is something that we were taught to do in journalism. We were taught to look at both sides of the picture, look at the bigger picture, then kind of look in the middle to see where the truth kind of intertwines the two.
So I don't know. You took theories of the press, right? I think you were in that class.
I think so,
So
yeah.
we took that class during fall of
The-
2020. So
Yeah.
it was during election time. And we ended up having a different professor teach it than we were originally scheduled for, but that's beside the point. It was a class that was created to do an analysis of news specifically during election times. And we had to sit down and watch Fox News, and we had to sit down and watch CNN and MSNBC, and then we also had to go ahead and look at print news media like the New York Times, the Washington Post, the New York Post, kind of seeing where these different things that were considered news sources laid on this spectrum of bias. And then kind of in real time develop our critical thinking and media literacy skills, which I know not everyone has that form of education and not everyone has to do that. And I honestly think it's something that should be taught in high schools, but that's a whole other TED talk for another time. But you have to kind of look at both sides of the coin, or you're automatically going to have bias no matter what. If you watch one specific news program all the time and never look at the other side, you're not going to have any idea why people from the other side think the way that they do. And I think a big thing with media literacy is also understanding the psychology of what causes people to feel a certain way about certain topics. It has a lot to do with the media that they consume. And even more so now with specifically Gen Z gets a lot of their media consumption through TikTok, which is short clips. There's news organizations on there, there's independent journalists on there. Um, who are, they go to the DNC or they go to the RNC and they're posting their personal experiences there and things like that. And it's more of a personalized consumption of media because TikTok creates a For You page for you based off of things that you previously liked. So in that aspect, it's even harder if TikTok's the only place you're getting your news to really see both sides of the coin because the algorithm is designed to only show you things that you would like or agree with.
Yes. And this kind of goes into the next part of like our personal experience with the election, but more often than not, while social media journalism can be beneficial in some ways, because we've done social media journalism as part of our time at the Equinox, especially for like live events and sporting events. And in some ways, it's very beneficial, but there's also a lot of cons when it comes to posting on social media with news. And places like TikTok, obviously, they're going to be tailoring to an audience that is younger, that wants things like this, that don't want to read, that don't want to, listen and watch longer news castings on like regular media like television. But something that you have to remember that it's not always ethical to get your news from social media either. And you know who gets accused of this a lot is TMZ. Especially, and I hate to bring up Liam Payne. I was a One Direction fan. I was a huge One Direction fan, so hearing about it was already devastating as is. But the fact that TMZ was the first to report it and also posted the body originally before they were, told to remove it by billions and billions of people, it's so unethical. And the same way they reported that Kobe Bryant and his daughter passed away in the helicopter crash in 2020, before anyone else even knew. Like, no one in his family knew until they heard it from TMZ. You know how sad that is?
And that is literally the part of the code of ethics that's about minimize harm. Literally, the
And
like core value of journalism thrown out the window.
and TMZ constantly breaks the code of ethics. And again, we're not going to be holding them to the same standard as we would anyone else because they don't follow anyway. So why should like they think it doesn't apply to them when it does and it should.
And I remember I took a multimedia journalism class with Professor Latson, and I think you took that class after I did.
Yeah.
But I remember we talked a lot in it about specific situations and what you should do under the SPJ code and what our thoughts were. Because every individual person is going to interpret that code a different way. And that's why you have codes within the bigger news organizations that you also have to follow as codes of conduct. But we were talking about a specific incident where it was a car crash that happened and all but one family member died. There were children involved, and they had the bodies laying out for the coroner to come and inspect. And the ethical question was, a reporter was there, they snapped a picture of the bodies being laid out. Should that picture have been posted with the news article about the crash? And I got into a very heated debate with a classmate because he was like, well, yeah, people have the right to know what happened. And I'm like, no, 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 no. First off, minors are involved, which is a whole other TED talk for another time. Me and this classmate got into arguments a lot. He was from the other campus. Um,
Of course.
yeah, it was one of those Zoom classes where both campuses were on it. Um, but one, minors were involved. Two, if you're publishing the story about this crash as things are happening, you should not be posting any photos that have to do with anyone who either hasn't been identified or their family members may not have been contacted yet, for them to find out through a shared post on Facebook. Because that's what
Yeah.
happens with news is it gets published on social media sites, then the links get shared, and it was such a like I remember feeling so angry about that discussion of ethics in class. And it goes back to literally like everything with the election and how things are reported on and what is considered, necessary and not necessary to be public information. And also like private individuals have more privacy and rights to privacy than public officials. A public official should be called out. You're supposed to shine light into dark places on them. Um, but yeah, so ethics is literally different for every person who interprets it, which is another issue. And journalism is one of the only protected um, professions under the Constitution, and you don't have to have a license to do it.
Yeah.
That is why media
And
literacy is important.
not only that, as we mentioned previously, there are a lot of people in the media industry that don't even have backgrounds in journalism, especially, obviously, we're not going to just say Fox, but across the board, there are people with political science degrees, English, this, that, and the third. But when it comes to journalism, there's a specific, I wouldn't say it's a science, but I would say there's a sense of like theoreticals to what that comes with journalism. And we trained for this for 4 years. Like, this is what we did, and we applied it outside the classroom and into the student newspaper that we ran. So we have firsthand knowledge of ethical journalism, and we did our best. And even sometimes when we did the equinox, we got called out for stuff. So,
Yeah.
you know
And I think one of the things that a lot of people like, there are places for people that don't have journalism degrees in journalism spaces, right? Because you're going to want political correspondence for things that they know more about the political climate, but you should be using them as a reference, not as your main source of information for things, you know? And that's where we come into the conversation of the people like the Anderson Coopers of the world who don't have that specific journalism degree, but they are used a lot to talk about political correspondences and things like that. But at the same time, you have to kind of like have some sort of formal training to really understand how you should be coming across on news platforms with that kind of information. And even whenever we were covering the 2020 election, we had a political science major that was our political correspondent because they knew more about how policy was formed than we did back then, which we learned a lot from this individual. But there was a lot of things and technicalities that we weren't well versed in. But there are also in journalism, you tend to specialize in something. I became our COVID-19 correspondent before I got bumped up to news editor and then editor in chief. I spent months reading every single article about COVID-19 I possibly could from the time that it was first found. It was awful, aside from the point, because I just constantly was being overloaded with information and having to learn about it because we knew it was going to come to the US and it was eventually going to affect us in our student newspaper and our college campus. That's how pandemics work. But to go off of this tangent, you know, there are places for people that don't have news backgrounds. However, they shouldn't be hosting an entire hour-long show on any network television where they're continuously inserting their opinion. And that is where the problem lies because a lot of people will go to Fox specifically. I'm just using them as an example because there is a lot of opinion even on their more news-based stories. And some of the people that report on there will say, well, in my opinion, but
or
the people,
somebody said.
yeah, but the people who are watching do not have the discernment and media literacy and critical thinking skills to separate the statements, if that, like, they don't have those skills. And that's why media literacy is such an important thing because they didn't learn how to discern information from opinion, facts from opinion. And, you know, the New York Times has an opinion section. We had an opinion section on our college newspaper. There is a time and a place for opinion. But whenever it starts filtering into the regular news and you're continuously adding commentary, that is whenever things get very diluted and there's not really a way to discern if you're someone who wasn't ever taught media literacy. And that is where the problem is with the American people and the type of media they consume. And I'm not saying it's everyone because there's people like us. I had a conversation with someone over the weekend at the Ren Fair I was at about media literacy. And he's like, I know it's not us. He was like, but it's just that a lot of people don't know how to critically think and discern when someone says, in my opinion. And then there's some people that don't even say that. And they just start talking about their opinion, and people are like, oh, well, this is still the news. And that's where the biggest issue with media literacy lies. I did want to talk very briefly about the news sources that Americans trust in 2024 from a YouGov study. Did you have anything else to add on that, Amaya?
No, but all I will say is that after listening to us talk for almost 2 hours at this point, we would hope that you have some kind of discernment. And again, as we mentioned in the beginning, take everything we say with a grain of salt, do your own research, come up with your own opinions. And we did our best to eliminate any opinion and more so give our actual experiences in this. But at the end of the day, it's truly up to you to decide where you believe these policies fit or don't fit into your own life.
Yeah. So as far as this YouGov study goes, is basically they surveyed a bunch of people asking if they trust this news source or if they don't trust it, and if they've consumed it in X amount of time, right? And then they got like plus points or minus points for if they were trusted or not trusted. And if you haven't looked into that source at all recently, you put like, I haven't been a part of that sources. I haven't consumed any of their content. So you look at the first like graph on this, and we will link this so that you can look at it yourself, and you see like, oh, the Weather Channel, BBC, PBS, the Wall Street Journal are most trusted. That makes sense, right? Like that makes a lot of sense. And then you go down to like the things that aren't as trusted, and it's like Comedy Central, Inflowra, Al Jazeera, National Enquirer, and you're like, okay, like once again we're seeing that this is generally what's trusted, what's not trusted. But then it breaks it down even further to trust in news sources among Democrats versus Republicans. And you see the big differences and how they got those points comparing what end Democrats are on and what end Republicans are on. And one big one, like ABC, is a huge discrepancy, but it ends up coming like middle of the ground on the original chart, because for Democrats, it is almost a plus 60, and for Republicans, it is a minus 20 on this chart. Same thing with the Associated Press, same thing with CBS, is very similar. Time Magazine. I wanted to go down to MSNBC is a huge gap. The National Review doesn't really have much of a difference between either, which I thought was interesting. And then if we go down to the National Enquirer, which is the bottom of the list, it's very much so distrusted by both. It's very similar ratings. And then Fox News, you see the Democrats very far on the distrust and Republicans very far on the trust side of it. And it also breaks it down into other categories, like Americans recently used which sources, and social media trust for news in Republicans and Democrats, and also looking at younger Americans in that demographic versus older Americans, and also which sources do Americans think are the most liberal and most conservative. So the most liberal outlet on this list that people all agreed upon was MSNBC. So that's a thought. And then the most right-leaning, right-wing Republican is Fox News. So you kind of see the two ends of the coin, and also going back to that chart that we talked about, with where things lean in the most unbiased way possible that they could do with examining it. It shows, where everything's are. And then it also talks about how they classify ideology of news sources, things like that. It's a really great article if you're wanting to see how people consume their news and what they are thinking is considered more Republican versus more Democrat leaning and things like that. But I just wanted to point out the big, like, people know which is which. They really do. All right, we're going to go into our personal experiences from the election and then some resources, and then we'll wrap this baby up before we get 3 hours.
Yeah. This is probably our longest project since COVID and when we worked on the equinox. So, yeah.
So, I unfortunately had to report voter intimidation at the polls. And I wanted to talk on that experience at the end of this episode because of the fact that I never thought that would be something I would have to do. And it was honestly very terrifying in the moment. And I want you guys to know that there are resources for when things like that happen. Obviously, leading up to this election, emotions and everything were very high for a lot of people and post election. And I went in person to vote. I always go in person to vote now that I'm back home. It's literally 5 minutes from my house. Why wouldn't I? And I got out of my car and I went to go in, and you hear people in the parking lot speaking their political opinions, which you're not really supposed to do at a polling place, but I'm waiting in line and minding my own business. And then after I came out, I had a woman try to approach me. And she looked at me and was like, "You made the right choice in there, right?" Very aggressively. And she was getting out of her car, and I was trying to get into my car. And she starts like coming towards me, and I get in my car. I was like, "It's none of your business who I voted for, etc., etc." And I got in my car and I left the door. She starts pounding on my window, screaming at me. And I just started backing my car out. I had no other option in that moment but to start backing my car out. Like, if I ran over her foot, that wasn't my problem at that point. Like, I needed to get away from this woman. I was able to get a picture of her and her license plate and report it. That whole justice process is going on. I've gotten a phone call about it. And I actually had a person call me asking if I was voting that day from the party that I am registered to. And I told them about the experience, and they also made a note of it and gave me the information once again to report it, which I had already done. But I did have a phone call about it, and I later was told that by a friend who went to vote at that same place later in the day, they had a state police officer stationed at that polling place. And I guess really my main thing is it clearly wasn't just me. I kind of, in the conversation I had, was not necessarily told, but kind of implied that there were poll watchers there, and I wasn't the only person who reported something. And they were going after people who looked like Democrats, which is bizarre to me because I guess I have blue hair and I'm a Democrat. Like, I don't know how you're deciding what someone's political views are based on their outward appearance whenever you can literally do whatever you want for your appearance. And that doesn't necessarily mean anything unless you want it to. And it just is still bizarre to me that that even happened, and it's awful. And I don't wish it to ever happen to anyone else. But it wasn't just me, clearly, or they wouldn't have stationed a state police officer there for the rest of the day. And there were also bomb threats in my county, not specifically my polling place, but in my county, as well as the county next door. So it was a very heated time where I'm at in central Pennsylvania. And I hope that the people who also went through the voter intimidation reported it. And I also hope that they still went in and voted. Luckily, she caught me on the way out, but I saw her going up to other people on their way in. So that is the part that bothers me the most, is did people turn around and not go and vote because they were screamed at by some crazy person?
I did not have that experience and I actually voted early. Post the day following the election, I mean, I knew like something deep inside of me told me like the other candidate was gonna win. And I woke up early that day. I don't know if you woke up early on Wednesday morning, like super early, but something told me just check the results, even though I knew. But I saw and I was angry. I'm not gonna lie to you. And then the next part I'm about to tell you, I I was angry and I woke up from a text from my family member. I will say this before I speak about it. We already resolved the issue, but I woke up from a text from a family member kind of taunting me. And I was angry because obviously we have opposing beliefs, and that's fine. But it angered me to the point of posting on social media, which I shouldn't have. And I will preface this, obviously, you're allowed to post whatever you feel on your social media as long as it's not harming others. I was angry and I posted on social media that I later regret. Nothing threatening anybody, but I definitely was acting a bit irate. And it has caused issues within my family. Again, we addressed it. Some family members aren't speaking to me. And listen, I already took accountability for what I did wrong. But I will say that I'll be honest, I am still angry because there are people that I see posting on social media making a mockery of the other party that didn't win. And also, I've seen posts on social media of young men saying your body, my choice. And I'm sure that's something that you've seen on social media, whether that be Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, whatever. And I will say this, I do not condone violence by any means, but if a man walked up to me and said that, what I do following should not get me in trouble for defending myself. So luckily, I have not had that experience as of yet, and knock on wood, I don't ever. But I personally feel that this country in the next coming weeks, months, and next year, once the president elect is in office, is not going to be the most safest place for women and other marginalized groups. So, yeah,
I also wanted to say, you're not the only one that has had issues with their family either. I went to the Delaware Run Fair this past weekend vending, and I talked to a lot of people about their experiences with the election and their families. And there's a lot of people not speaking to each other because of this. And it is very saddening to see. And it's heartbreaking because, your family is supposed to be the most important thing, right? And I'm very happy with the fact that despite there being differences in political parties in my family, we have all been able to keep it pretty. We're not going to talk about it. What happened happened. You make your plans, I make my plans, and we're not going to taunt each other, which once again, very happy that that is my current situation, but I know it's not for a lot of people. And it breaks my heart. I also did have to put a post on social media for my business, reinstating the values that we follow and how we are a safe place and accepting place for everyone, whether it is on my social media, whether it is in my booth at a fair, whether it is in my store. And I am doing my own initiatives to try and help people ground and feel at peace. I'm going to start free weekly meditation and grounding workshops in my store. I offered free smoke cleansing for people last week, and it is going to get a lot harder probably for specifically my store with the community that I'm in, but I'm ready to deal with that battle. I've been getting crap from people since I opened. So that's nothing new, but we are not done fighting and we are going to stand up for each other. That's kind of the point I'm at. And so I want to go into the resources now because I think that this is very important. And if we find more, we will add them. These are just all of the ones that we have currently. So, some resources for vulnerable communities. 988 is the suicide and crisis lifeline. You can call or text if someone you know is in emotional distress or suicide crisis, or you yourself are. And we will also link the chat for online for the suicide and crisis hotline. There is the National Alliance on Mental Illness helpline. For more information, we'll have the link. and it can be reached Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time at 1-800-950-NAMI, which is 6264, or you can get information via email, info@nami.org. The Trevor Project for LGBTQIA plus youth. Looking for free confidential crisis support? Call 1-866-488-7386 or text START to 678-678. You can also visit their website to chat with a gender affirming and queer friendly counselor. We also have the Veterans Crisis Line, which is 988 and then press 1. Or you can text 838-255, and they also have an online chat option. For substance abuse support due to things coming up, Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous have resources on their website, including virtual meetings as well as local meetings that you can find, which will be linked. And then the SAMHSA's National Helpline for Mental and/or Substance Use Disorders can be reached at 1-800-662-4357. The Trans Lifeline is available at 877-565-8860, and they offer peer support for the trans community members. Thrive Lifeline, which is another trans and LGBTQ support line. You can text Thrive to 313-662-8209. The Sage LGBT Elder Hotline is a peer support hotline for local resources for older adults in the LGBTQIA plus community, which is 1-888-234-SAGE. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is 800-799-7233. And then the Safe Horizons hotlines, which specifically deal with domestic violence, crime victims, as well as rape and sexual assault victims. The domestic violence line is 1-800-621-4673. The crime victims hotline is 1-800-689-4357. And the rape and sexual assault victims hotline is 1-212-227-3000. We hope that none of our listeners need any of those or anyone you know needs any of those, but should you, we have the resources available. They will be in the description on both the podcast audio and the YouTube video, as well as posted on our social media, and we will make sure that we keep them up in the feed. Probably will be a pinned post on at least Instagram.
And we hope that this was an informative episode and encourage you again to do your own research outside of all the resources and information that we provided. And we hope you take care of yourself today and every day. For those who didn't vote for the president-elect, it may be a battle uphill, but there's no reason to not stand up and fight. We can be angry and, or we can be ready for battle and ready to fight for what's right.
And I just want to finish off with saying that this podcast will continue to be a safe space for people who are in the witchcraft and spiritual community, who are struggling. You can always reach out to us on social media. If you are needing resources, we will more than happily send them to you, send them your way so that you have them easily accessible. Don't ever hesitate as far as that goes. We will make sure we keep them readily available to send to you. And we will continue with our regularly scheduled programming, but we felt it very necessary to do an episode where we truly spoke on this. And season 4 is going to be taking a pretty big turn in what exactly we're going to be speaking on and focusing a lot more on social justice as witches and things like that, and really how we can band together as a community and support one another. And I look forward to that season, but we will continue with the rest of season 3 as scheduled. And our episode that was scheduled for this week will be put into the vault for a later date. We also will be having the astrology almanac and tarot card of the day back next week, but we wanted to keep this episode a little more serious.
You will be able to find this week's tarot card message and astrology almanac on our social medias come Friday when we post this episode. So don't feel like you're going to be missing out because we're still going to post it. We just felt the need for a more serious tone this time around. And we look forward to seeing you next week. And again, you know what to do. Follow, like, subscribe. We don't got to tell you twice. We love you and hope you all have a great evening.
Bye, guys.